In the current age, many of the peoples of Turil live in relative harmony. Trade routes snake throughout the continents, not only from city to city, but between sovereign kingdoms as well, bringing with them goods, services, and knowledge to be shared from around the world. However, it was not always this way. In what the elves of this world would call the not-too-distant past, the borders of nations were much more protected, and disputes over territory and resources were an all-too-common occurrence. The desire to grow and conquer is rarely an estranged thought to those in power, especially those with the means to use it. And the idea of war bringing not only fortune, but glory to a nation is and always has been among the ideals of the powerful, especially in the lands of men. Mighty kingdoms, wreathed in steel and spell alike, marched on one another for dominance of land and sea, in search of glory and determined to make their mark on the world. This all changed, crumbled to pieces, in 3 days and 3 nights. On what would be, to most of the world, a fine summer morning wrapped in sunshine and a warm breeze, something happened that would change the course of history forever. Above the quaint villages and mighty kingdoms, the sky darkened, not by night, nor by cloud, but by the very blue sky above, turning black, with the sun in full view. Lightning arced across the sky, crackling with ferocity never before seen by those forced to be its witness. The Spellplague had begun. Many of those bearing witness to this horrifying sight believed it an omen, commandment, or perhaps punishment from the gods. But no amount of praying would make it stop, and before long, what seemed to be a warning became a nightmare made real. The black and lightning-riddled sky began to crack and split, as it gave birth to horrors beyond the understanding of the people below. Plumes of strange light and wind bellowed from the openings in the heavens, and began to destroy all they touched. Those who could not manage to escape its way quickly enough were annihilated by its path. Some lands were luckier than others, not receiving as brutal a bombardment, but among the least fortunate was that of the city of Galvin. The people of Galvin were forced to watch in awestruck terror as more than half of the city was torn from existence itself, and the very land on which they stood, along with all the people on its soil, were swallowed by the sky. The barrage of death from above was merciless and swift, but to the horror of those who survived, they paled in comparison to what would come next. The tears began spreading down from the sky and reaching the ground. These abhorrent portals began pulling in everything they came close to, with some, occasionally, allowing something else to climb out from the other side. Creatures from the darkest underbelly of the realms trudged across the countryside, some of which had not been seen on earth and soil since time immemorial. Those with the means to do so raised their hands against them, rising as heroes of their age. But as they reached into the weave for strength, using spells and magical weapons of legend, they found nothing. The magic they had trusted in somehow abandoned them, needed it most. They had nothing but steel and blood behind them now. The armies of the world had no choice but to toss aside flags and allegiances. This was now a battle for the survival of their way of life, and the only way they stood a chance was together. The path of destruction wrought by these monsters of the dark would be almost beyond measure. Despite the banding together of the nations of the world, without the aid of magic, the gap between mere mortals and the monsters of the dark was insurmountable. And though they fought bravely, the castle walls and keeps of man began to crumble. But as all hope seemed lost, it is said that something truly amazing happened. Although this part of the story has only been told through myth, as its supposed witnesses were few, it is still told nonetheless. As the walls of the castles fell, and the beasts of this living nightmare prepared to step on the throat of mankind, they began to burn. The clouds above parted, and in a bright flash, pillars of holy fire and light scorched their cursed flesh. Beings of beautiful radiance descended to protect the last bastions of the gods' children. Wearing crowns of golden light and wielding weapons of pure divinity, these paragons of hope are said to have pushed back the darkness with unmatched blinding fury. It is said that this display took mere moments, and just as quickly as they arrived, they were gone, leaving the mortals of the world to pick up the pieces. Historians would later conclude that regardless of these supposed appearances of the celestial beings being truth or myth, one can approximate that from the sundering of the sky to the defeat of these monsters of the dark, 2 days had elapsed. Then came the third and final day. When it seemed it might finally be over, when the cracks in the heavens seemingly disappeared, the pulses began. Waves of subtle and unstable magical influence flowed in all directions, from all directions. To most, these pulses were unnoticeable, but to wielders of magic, they were a plague. Those with the knowledge of the weave as their tool, the arcanists, the druids, and the divine partitioners, were driven mad. The pulses pulled at the arcane knowledge within their heads, and along with it, their minds were torn as well. But this fate was kind compared to that of those with inherent magic. For those blessed with arcane power from within, either at birth or gifted by a powerful entity, the pulses pulled at the magic within them. This pulling tore them apart from the inside out, leaving nothing left. Not all of those capable of spellcasting were affected, at least not fatally. Some were only wounded, while others somehow made it through unscathed. But the arcane world was not left without deep, deep scars. When the sun rose on the fourth day, the sky had returned to its calming blue, and the lightning had faded. It was finally, really over. Though the plague had ended, those still left with magic found the techniques they had once used had to be relearned before they could return to casting spells. And though there was some suspicion directed at them at first for the cause of this plague, it became clear in time that no one truly knew why it happened. A reality that stays true all the way to the current age. For the kingdoms of men, their shattered borders lay broken on the ground, waiting to be picked up. But instead, they were left to sink into the soil. It had become clear that even to the most stubborn kingdoms of Turil, that if a threat like the Spellplague were ever to happen again, they would need each other, now more than ever. As the people of Turil stepped out into this new world together, they found that more had changed than they once thought. Along with the loss of so much, new things had seemingly appeared from nowhere. The city of Sigil, a strange and mystical civilization, now sat once where there was a simple valley, as well as the exotic nation of Tymanthir, which brought with it a people never before seen, the Dragonborn. And so, the world moved forward. In some ways, it grew and healed. In others, it mourned and stumbled. But these things and more were done together, relying on one another to help build a better world from the pieces they were left with.